Welcome back, cool cats. Today we're going over SPY, QQQ, Dixie, TLT, the ADD, and more. And for the first time on this channel, I'm even going over Bitcoin. So if you love markets like we do, let's get right into this. So we're kicking things off with SPY. If you're curious what these lines represent, I went over those. They are pattern targets. Went over that in my last video, which I'm going to link above here. As we can see, SPY has broken below this main support line, and we had a pretty big sell-off. Now, if you're curious what led to that, let's switch to QQQ. Like I said before, QQQ is pretty much holding up the whole market. When QQQ got up to this main resistance line, it rejected very sharply, and it took the whole market down with it. But as you can see, the second that QQQ hit this main support line here in orange, going all the way back to December of 2022, we got a good bounce. But I think the real question now is, was this a dead cat bounce going right back up into the supply zone, and then we're finally going to break this main support line and fulfill these pattern targets here that we laid out in the last video? Or are we going to go up a little bit further first? And we can see here, if we can get through this supply zone, QQQ could actually come up to this previous support. Now it could potentially act as resistance around 495. It could even come up to this previous support line and hit somewhere between, depending on where it hits, about 494, 495, all the way up to like 496, 497. This is going right into election day. And historically, markets often sell off up into the election as people de-risk and then they rally afterwards. We've kind of done the exact opposite, so I really do have to wonder, is this going to be a sell the news event? And I think the RSI is really adding confluence to this. Notice what we've got here. We have a hidden bullish divergence. We have a lower low on the RSI. We actually had a slightly higher low on the actual chart. And usually what happens is you get one last impulsive bounce to the upside, followed by a sharp correction to the downside. We've got so much overhead bearishness, it's not even funny. We've got this long running rising wedge. We've been covering this for months now, and we have another rising wedge going right up into the election where we've already broke this support line. Now, I find it interesting too, if we switch back to SPY on the daily chart, we had this bit of a hidden bullish divergence here on a longer term time frame. So I would almost expect SPY to bounce more than I would expect QQQ to bounce, but that's the same kind of structure. We have this big rising wedge pattern. We've broken this resistance line, and this is in continuation of this much larger rising wedge pattern. And when we zoom out to the weekly, I don't think this is just a coincidence. We have our first, second, and third pattern targets. The first pattern target is essentially targeting this previous resistance, now potentially going to act as support. Second target is targeting this demand zone, which happens to be the top of the support on the weekly Ichimoku cloud. And then look at this. The third target comes down into this very strong demand zone, which is essentially one of the strongest parts of the Ichimoku cloud support. And I don't think it's just a coincidence that when we zoom all the way out to the monthly time frame, this demand zone, if we drag over here, lines up very closely with the beginning of the monthly Ichimoku cloud support for SPY. And you might ask, are we seeing the same thing on QQQ on the monthly? Yes, we are. This secondary pattern target is lining up almost perfectly with the beginning of monthly Ichimoku cloud support. The secondary target is coming down here into a little bit thicker area, which also just kind of happens to line up with a natural key level. So could the market just rally right into or after the election? Yeah, maybe, but I think all of the technicals are screaming this wants to go down. And frankly, when we take a look at the VIX, I think the VIX is potentially confirming this. If we look at this main level here, this key level, and we draw a trend line at the top, this has been acting as a very, very strong resistance area, but then we've got this support line, ascending support line that's been coming up here. So if we were to treat this as an ascending triangle, which apparently it really appears to be that, we have two possibilities. This could break to the downside, but it could definitely also break to the upside. So if you're curious what that would look like, if this breaks to the upside, it's indicating that the VIX could come up to somewhere around 31, which actually happens to be a key level. But if it decided it wanted to come to the downside, we could see the VIX go all the way down to around 12, which also is a pretty strong support area. And call me a permabear, but my money is on this breaking to the upside. There's just so much uncertainty, not just going into the election, but also about what could happen afterwards. We may not know who's president until days after the actual election. And as you can see, we've also got the VIX squeezing for multiple days, and it's above this 21 period EMA. So it's very likely to go to the upside. I've shown you all before how the ADD actually can predict really big market moves, and the ADD has been forming this huge symmetrical triangle. Now, what's interesting to me is the apex of this is not on election day. It's not on the 5th. The apex for this is targeting like the 11th. And if you're not sure, the 11th is a Monday. I find it so interesting. Sometimes these patterns can break out when they're about the 70% completion mark, which would put this right around basically the day after election. I think regardless of which way this goes, the market is either going to have a huge blow off top or it's going to have a big crash. And we actually might see the crash happen before the election because people are just so afraid of what could happen. Markets hate uncertainty. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on Dixie because I went over this in my last video, but we had this what looked like an ascending triangle. We had a support line here and a resistance here. I said if it broke to the upside, we would be likely seeing the Dixie go up to about 105.20, but if it broke to the downside, it was basically targeting this main support level, which it did. Look, it came down here. We had this one day where we wicked below, but we did not close below. It treated this as a very strong support area, and we got this strong bounce. And frankly, I think until proven otherwise, we could potentially see maybe a pullback on the dollar, but then we could see this even go even higher. My main target up here was around 105.50. And I think a lot of people are piling into the dollar for safety. When you are uncertain of what's going to happen, you want cash that you can deploy whenever you need it. Now, that said, when we zoom out to the daily and we look at the RSI here, we had a hidden bullish divergence here. So we were going to expect there to be a bounce, but I think this could rally for possibly a few days, but it's more likely the daily RSI is indicating this wants to go actually back to the downside. If you're loving this content, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and tap that notification bell so that you won't miss these market updates. One of these things I want to show you on the Dixie is everybody's like, oh, the dollar, it's losing strength. Well, not according to this monthly chart. Look at the Ichimoku cloud. We just build support after support after support. And right now, if we zoom way in, I mean, look at this. This is the Ichimoku cloud support. We came down here. We almost broke it, did not break it. It acted as support as we would expect it to. We're getting this rally. Will we break this resistance line? Nobody knows until we get there. But it's undeniable that the dollar is growing in strength year after year after year. On the flip side, though, when we switch over to the weekly time frame, this is all overhead supply. This is all resistance here, as indicated by Ichimoku. So this is why I'm thinking at least over the next few months, we could definitely get a pullback if we hit this resistance and bounce sharply down from it. We could get a pullback on that, and that spells good news for TLT. Speaking of, so as I shared before in this last video, we had this falling wedge that was going right into this main support level here. It broke below a little bit, but then we got this breakout, and it ended up being a false breakout. We hit this main resistance line, and when we consolidated for 3 whole days and then finally broke back down. But what I have seen before is sometimes you do get an initial false breakout because people get a little bit excited, they get a little bit ahead of themselves. Initially, this pattern was targeting somewhere around election day, maybe the day after, maybe 2 days after, for this to actually break out convincingly to the upside. There's obviously no guarantee that it's going to, but that's the way that this is targeting. And I am a little bit leery because it broke below this very strong ascending support line. But with what we're seeing on Dixie, if that resistance on Dixie holds up, Dixie seems to be leading TLT right now. So if Dixie rejects, around the same time that TLT hits this main support line, we could absolutely see it breaking out to the upside. And of course, to get our pattern target for that, we're going to actually drag this down here to where we would expect this to break out. And if it did, we would actually see it break back above this resistance, then potentially act as support and be targeting somewhere around this old resistance line around 93.08. And before we get off of TLT, one thing I do want to show you, this is like the inverse of the dollar strength index. The dollar strength index for years has been building support. Not so with TLT. This is the Ichimoku cloud resistance for bonds, for long bonds. Look at this. It's nothing but resistance. So in order for bonds to get above this, there is just so much overhead supply. A lot of people are very bullish bonds. When you look at this chart, it kind of makes it hard to be bullish on bonds, at least for a few years. And with the current administration and possibly the next administration adding trillions of dollars to the deficit every 100 days, I mean, who wouldn't want a big yield for risking their money loaning it to the US government? All right, for the first time ever on this channel, we're about to go over Bitcoin. But before we do, I would love to know your all's thoughts on how you think this election is going to affect the markets by leaving a comment down below. So to kick things off, we have to take a look at Bitcoin on a linear scale, and we can see we have a very well-defined ascending channel. We have a touch point, touch point, touch point, touch point. This yellow channel here. Even here, we broke below, we came back up, we struggled to get back into the channel, came back down. This acted as support, as you can clearly see. And so if we're going strictly based off this linear channel, this is indicating that Bitcoin could pull back somewhere around 52 to 53,000, and that could be a really good buying zone. But that at some point, and again, this is on the weekly time frame, at some point Bitcoin could come all the way up to somewhere around 89,000, 90,000. It depends on where it hits that resistance or where it hits that support. But if we take a look at Bitcoin on the daily time frame here, and if we exclude this outlier of August 5th, we can see we had a falling wedge, we had a breakout, we had a back test and confirmation. So this is currently indicating that Bitcoin could come all the way up to around 76,800 before it even gets like a really sharp pullback. Now I want you to keep this ascending channel in mind as we switch over to log scale. Now let's take a look at this puppy. We've got a few different things going on log scale. When we go back to the inception of Bitcoin and we draw this ascending support line, you see we've got multiple touch points. This is indicating that if Bitcoin were to come back to, somewhere around 38,000, if it did, that would be an amazing buy area right there. Of course, it would have to break through, a decent amount of support there. But this is the other thing I want to show you. Look at this ascending channel here in purple. Multiple touch points. We come up, we come down. We broke above. You can see it struggled here to get above it. Broke above a little bit, bounced, tried to use it as support, came back in. So this seems like a very valid ascending channel to me. And wouldn't you know it, look at this, look at this. This falling wedge is targeting the upper resistance of that ascending channel. So does it mean that Bitcoin has to go that high? No, but it's indicating that at least in the short term, Bitcoin wants to go up rather than go down. And again, this ascending channel here is indicating that if Bitcoin were to pull back to around 52 to 53,000, that would be an amazing buy area, which again, as you can see, lines up perfectly with the linear ascending channel here. Again, this is not financial advice, and please don't take anything that I say on my channel as financial advice, but this is what the charts seem to be indicating. All right, so we're looking at the investing.com economic calendar. I've got this dialed into just only the most important catalysts for the week. Obviously, we've got the presidential election on Tuesday. That's going to be a huge market mover. We're probably going to see a ton of volatility leading right up into that and after that. We see volatility, we're going to see waves that come off of that afterwards. And then, obviously we got some bond auctions that are coming out on Tuesday and Wednesday. The real big one though, obviously, the Fed is coming out with their FOMC interest rate decision. That's going to be a huge market mover. So, this week is just going to be full of like big catalysts. And then if that wasn't big enough, when we take a look at Moomoo's earnings calendar, we've got plenty of earnings this week too. We've got Palantir posting earnings after the market on Monday. We've got Progressive giving earnings pre-market on Tuesday. Got Novo Nordisk, Toyota, Qualcomm, ARM, some pretty heavy hitters out on Wednesday. There's not a whole lot going on Thursday except for maybe Airbnb and Motorola. And then on Friday, we've got Sony out with earnings. I'm about to share this week's trading rule to live by. But before I do, I just want to wish all you cool cats a great week. Stay safe, go out and vote, and God bless.